going to give you a very early projected record for Ohio State. Before we get into the 2025 projection, let's look back at the projections from the last few seasons, again, using our formula. And you can see 2021, the projection was 11-1. This team went 10-2. In 2022 and 2023, the projection was 10-2. They finished 11-1 the regular season. And then last season, the projection was actually exactly right, 10-2. And that was the finish. So keep in mind, these projections are conservative. It's a formula that we use, just kind of playing the odds of these games. And it is all based off of our tier rankings. So you can check that out. You can see exactly which tier all the teams are in the Power 4. And so that's, again, where this projection comes from. And like you see right here, the projection has been within one game at least every year from the past 4 seasons. So we've got it right on the money this past season, but the other seasons it was off by 1 game. So you can expect, Ohio State's projection to be off by 1 game, or maybe it's right on the money. Of course, Ohio State's one of the easier teams to predict. It's one of the easier projections to make because they're always at the top of college football. So again, here's the schedule. Now let's get into the projection, and this is the scale that we use. Again, this is all based off of our tier rankings. If you have a team in the same tier, you're going to be in that 40 to 60% range. If you have a team that's a tier below you, for example, then you're going to be in the 61 to 70% range. But if you play that team on the road, then it becomes a 40 to 60% game. So home field advantage does play into this a good bit. All right, so we look at first the easy wins, the wins that are pretty much guaranteed for Ohio State. And I think you've got 5 of those. You've got Grambling State and you've got Ohio, easy wins in the non-conference. You've got Purdue, UCLA, and Rutgers. So all of these games, again, Ohio State is high enough ahead of them in the tier rankings to where they should win. It's an 80% chance or greater against all 3 of those opponents. But you look at the rest of the schedule, I mean, there aren't a lot of gimme games for Ohio State this year. There are a lot of games, most of these games they should win. They'll be favored in, but again, there are not a lot of easy wins for Ohio State. So that does make this schedule, again, a little bit tricky. How about games where they wind up in the blue? So 71 to 80%. You've got Washington, you've got Minnesota, and you've got Wisconsin. Now, if these games are at home, the Washington and Wisconsin games, if they were at home because of the tier system, those games would be in the green. So those would be counted as wins. But those games are actually a little bit tricky being on the road. So Washington and Wisconsin both on the road, potential trap games or upset alert type games, I would say. So watch out for those 3 opponents if you're looking for a big upset, a team to upset Ohio State. I think it comes from those 3 games. You could even argue Illinois, but Illinois is a tier 2 team because of the way they finished last year, and they got some pieces coming back. They're a tier 2 team. Ohio State is a tier 1 team, but because that game's on the road, Illinois actually is a 50-50 game. Now, if I'm just making a prediction on that game, I would go over 60% for Ohio State, but this is the formula that we use. So this is a mathematical formula. There's really no personal predictions here. We'll be doing those down the road, but Illinois, a 50-50 game because it's on the road and because Illinois is just 1 tier behind Ohio State. Texas, a 50-50 game. Both of those teams are tier 1 teams. Penn State, also a 50-50 game. Because they're both tier 1 teams. And then you've got Michigan, who is a tier 2 team like Illinois, but that game is on the road, so it's another 50-50 game. So this projection would look a lot different if Michigan and Illinois were at home, and let's say Penn State and Texas were on the road, because then Illinois and Michigan would be in the purple, and you'd have Penn State and Texas still in the white. Those would still be 50-50 games because they're in the same tier. So that's interesting there when you look at the way this schedule sets up. And when you average all this out, and keep in mind, I showed you the last 4 years, I showed you the projections. This team is projected to go 10-2 or 11-1 every year. And also, before you start calling me a hater, I picked Ohio State preseason last season to win the national championship. And I may pick them again. Who knows? This is not my prediction. But when you average this out, because of this schedule and because of the difficulty of this schedule, their projection actually is 9-3. So this is the lowest projection for Ohio State in the past 5 seasons, and they're still a tier 1 team. So that just tells you the difficulty of this schedule. You might think this schedule is not all that tough. It's not as tough as last year, especially in the Big Ten, but the way it sets up with Washington on the road, Illinois on the road, Wisconsin on the road, those are tricky games. Michigan, obviously a tough game. Penn State, and then you add Texas in the non-conference. You know, if you had Texas, if you didn't have Texas here and you had Marshall again or something like that, this projection will be 10-2. But because you've got a tough non-conference game, you've got some tricky road games in the conference, and you do have to play Penn State, a tier 1 team, and Michigan on the road, Illinois on the road. Yeah, it does come out to 9-3. So I was surprised, honestly, when I did the math here, that it was 9-3, because I figured, just like always, the projection would be 10-2 or 11-1. So based off of this, I think a 10-2 season for Ohio State and another playoff berth is actually a good season, again, based off this projection. So, how do they stack up with other teams at the top of the Big Ten? Well, check this out. They're actually behind Illinois and then Penn State and Oregon. All those 3 teams are 10-2, and it just shows you the difference in schedules, because Illinois is a tier 2 team. They're a whole tier below Ohio State when we do this formula, but they're projected to have a better record than Ohio State. So that just tells you how much easier the schedule is for Illinois versus Ohio State. So this is a pretty tough schedule. Again, I think people see no Indiana and they see no Oregon, and they think that Ohio State's going to have a much easier schedule this year. It's going to be a breeze. But you have to look at those tricky road games. You have to look at Illinois, especially on the road. That one's going to be tough. And then adding Texas in the non-conference, that makes all the difference with this schedule. So they're projected to go 9-3, the same as Michigan and Indiana. And again, Michigan and Indiana are tier 2 teams. They're a tier below Ohio State, but their schedules are much more favorable. So that's why you do see Ohio State at 9-3. And could this schedule potentially keep Ohio State out of the playoff if they do lose 3 games? Again, that's not my prediction. I'm just giving you the math here. And it is very interesting to see that number as low as it is. So, Ohio State projected at 9-3, the lowest projection in the past 5 years, despite the fact that they are a tier 1 team. Very, very interesting. So would love to get your thoughts on this. What is your early projection for Ohio State? Let me know down in the comments below.